Okay, hey guys. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to walk you through some of the basic functionality of QGIS, starting with the interface, how to add data, and also some symbology things. This one is going to be divided up into 3 separate videos, one for the interface, one for adding data, and one to look at symbology. So that's what we're going to start with. So the first thing with QGIS, so it doesn't really matter which version of QGIS you have. This is more or less how it's always going to open. And so generally speaking, if you have any projects, they'll show up in this middle. If you have a new project, it'll show up on the side. And then if there are any ads, which mine currently doesn't have, they would also show up on this sidebar here. And so you can get rid of those advertisements by clicking the little X button, and this is what the interface is going to show up as. Up at the top, you are going to see very, very similar to some of the older Windows programs where it says project, edit, view, layer, settings, and so on and so on. This is where you're going to find most of the things that you need to actually interact and manage data. On the left-hand side, you have 2 major browsers or 2 major windows that you see here. These ones are always going to show up unless you click the X button, which in that case, they're going to go away. This top one is going to allow you to navigate through a couple of different things. So your normal windows, and then also you can take a look at some other things like some different web map services or some ArcGIS services. So those are some places where you can get data. There are different virtual connections that you can make. And then your layers, which we don't have anything in right now, this is actually what's in your project currently. So anything that you're working on, this is where this is going to show up. And I'll mention this a little bit later, but it draws bottom to top. So bottom layer is always going to draw first. It's going to draw at the bottom layer. Top one is going to draw at the top, so it's the last layer to draw. So if you have something that is bigger than the thing underneath it, you're going to cover that up. So if you don't have something that you've worked on before, you can just start with an empty new project. It's going to just have a normal web interface there, and then it just crops up like this. And so this section right here is where your data is going to end up. So if you have any data that you then put in here, if there's anything that you end up working with, get this going. So for example, in my case, I can pull together and I can take this shapefile, put it in here, and it's going to show up there. So this is the shapefile. So this is where you can interact with your data in terms of the map, see what it looks like, all those sorts of things. And then, as I mentioned here, you're going to have on this left-hand side, you are going to have what the layer actually is. Generally speaking, it's a good practice to make sure that you don't have any spaces. I typically use underscores. Dashes sometimes get a little bit problematic with some GIS software as well. So things that you can do, if you have a middle scroll button on your mouse, you can scroll out and scroll in, and that's going to use the zooms. You can see this hand button here. I can move my map around. Now, if ever I get lost, so let's say I've zoomed out somewhere or moved something, or things just ended up that way and I can't see my data, I can't find it. One thing you can always do is you can always right click on your layer and zoom to that layer. This is going to get that data set back. And so that's one way that you can do that. You can also hit this full zoom button here, and you can also zoom in using this plus button, or the plus with the magnifying glass, and then the minus with the magnifying glass is going to zoom that out. And then you can flip it back to this nice little hand so that you can move it around. I generally speaking don't personally use the zooms in and outs in that way. I usually use a scroll button. And then I also will use the full zoom, or if I've lost my data, I'll right click and do that. Generally speaking, in QGIS, there's 2 major different things that you can pretty much always do that's going to do something. You can right click on something, which is going to usually pull up some sort of menu, or you can double click on something, and if you wait a little bit, something typically happens. So in this case, it's going to pull up all of the properties. But same thing here, I can right click and it's going to open copy coordinate. Double clicking is also going to zoom that out, zoom that in this particular case. But this is true with most things that you have. If you open up an attribute table, you do things like that, this is all going to be available to you. So those are some ways that you can interact with the QGIS interface. We'll get further into it the more we go down the line, because there's going to be more things that you can do with it. So you can add in any sort of data that you want, and we're going to come back in a second to actually add in data, which you have already seen already, but we're going to do it again.